Okay, welcome to another one of our free photo webinars. This one, of course, is for October 14, 2014. And I'm so glad you guys have decided to come out and join in the conversation on having fun photographing people. Before we get going, my name is Linford Morton, and I'm the host of this new webinar / Google Hangout on Air. And we're going to be having a good time this evening talking. So most of you know that we are now on the Google Hangouts on Air platform. We have decided to ditch the other webinar platform. So we'll see how this works out. I'd be interested in getting feedback from you all after we're done on what the experience was like for you and whether or not you thought it was something you enjoyed. Before we go any further, just a couple quick notes. You will find the recording for this webinar on our blog, my blog, photocoachpro.com. As a matter of fact, if you go to freephotowebinars.com, it will take you to the page where we have not just the upcoming webinar, but you'll also see archives going back 4 years for as long as we've been doing these. So it's worth a look. We're on Google Plus now, and so while we're here, you might want to stop in and check us out on our photo projects community. This is a pretty vibrant community for people who are doing things like Project 365s, Project 52s, things of that nature, and any other kind of a personal photo project. It's just a place to share with other people who are on the same journey as you are, to share with them and encourage them as well as they go along. And of course, many of you know the Shuttlebug Excursions is the meetup group in Washington, D.C., where we get together and shoot and share in person. I've loaded a couple that I'll be leading in the next month or so, a photo walk down the H Street corridor in Washington, D.C., and then we're going to go up to Philadelphia for the Eastern Penitentiary. And I know Mark has loaded a number of others as well. So there's plenty going on for those of you who want to get out and shoot and share. This is more of the social aspect of photography, and it's always a fun time when we get together. Now, for those of you who want a little more help with structure and learning, I teach photography. Phototour DC is the business I founded, and we go and learn the principles of photography on walking workshops around some of the picturesque areas of Washington, D.C. This weekend, we'll be doing them around the monuments as well as a night photography, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that near the end. But today we want to talk about having fun photographing people. This is a picture of Drew Brees. He's the quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. And here he is teaching a little old lady how to take a selfie. I got that when he was at a training camp in West Virginia this summer. She was struggling with her camera. She didn't know what to do when he came by. So he took the camera from her and said, "Hey, let me teach you how to shoot a selfie," and tried 4 or 5 times until he actually got one. Of course, all of the media, as you see behind, went crazy trying to get pictures of that. But the reason I chose this topic, and I thought that was fun because he was having fun taking pictures. And the reason I chose this topic for this evening was because when I'm teaching, for instance, doing a photo tour, before we get started, there's always sort of a get to know you period when I ask people sort of what brought you here, what do you hope to get out of the evening, and oh yeah, what kinds of things do you like to take pictures of? And I'm always surprised at the number of people who say, "I'll take pictures of anything except people. I don't like to take pictures of people." And I always say, well, why not? And it's always some range, one of several reasons. Perhaps they just don't like the fact that they can't control the situation like they could if it was an inanimate object. Perhaps they say they just feel funny going up and talking to people and getting them to pose or not pose. They feel they don't, there are lots of reasons why people might feel that, yeah, this picture of people thing is not for me. And if you dig a little bit, you always find, typically I find it's just that we're a little insecure because we're not quite sure how to do it and how to have fun doing it. So this is what we'll talk about tonight: how to have fun photographing people. Fun like this guy. I don't know if you've ever seen it. If you've ever been to New York, you might have bumped into this. Is Luis Mendez on the right, and another photographer on the left, Robert Graham. And when I went up to the Photo Plus Expo last year, I saw him outside, and I was in a rush, so I couldn't get a picture of him. I went up to B&H again last week, and I saw him standing out there, and we stopped and we had just a great conversation. He has been doing this, taking pictures of people on the street for more than 40 years, and he makes it look so easy. So a lot of the things that he does and the things that I've learned as I've done it myself was what we will look at this evening. Now, he told me that this is a press camera that he bought back in 1959. He said he was working at Macy's, and the photographer who was working with him said, I'm not going to teach you anything else until you buy your own camera. So he went out the camera, and he's been using it ever since. And as a matter of fact, he teaches people how to do street portraits as well. And then Robert Graham is another prolific photographer in the New York City area. Just happened to bump into them. And I thought, a lot of the stories he told me were about, how his camera gave him access and just gave him so many interesting stories. And just one off the top, he said, the picture on the right, you probably can't see because it's very small, but it's of Jackie Onassis, or Jackie Kennedy, he said. I'm sorry. Jackie Kennedy with the same camera that he has. She was a photographer who used the same camera. And he said on the back of that, he has a picture of Carolyn Kennedy holding this picture because he said she was somewhere in New York opening a school. He went up there and he showed it to her. And as soon as he walked in, she screamed, "Hey, that's my mom's camera." And he goes, "You want to see something else?" And he showed this image. And she was just so giddy when she saw that. So, so now he has, all these incredible stories only because he gets out and he has fun taking pictures of people. Now, let's do a little defining what I mean by people pictures. We're talking about formal portraits. We're talking about environmental portraits, street portraits, and then event photography. Those are the kinds of things I think about when I think of of taking pictures of people. It's, people in a number of different environments and in a number of different ways. So what we will do this evening is we will look at a lot of pictures. But first, before we go much further, I'm going to talk about one of the projects I'm working on where I get to photograph people. And I think it's a good way to sort of ease your way into it. And then after that, we'll look at some of the principles of photographing people. And then after that, we will look at some more images of both good and bad that I've done to sort of illustrate a lot of the principles and topics we'll cover this evening. And then after that, we'll close down for the evening, and that should get us to pretty close to the end of the hour. Okay, very good. Now, I thought we would be able. I launched a group chat, and I thought I would be able to see you guys chatting, but I'm not seeing anyone, so I'm guessing it's not showing up, and I'm not sure why that would be. But we're just gonna nix it and keep moving. And of course, my screen just went blank. So give me 1 second. I apologize for that. Let me get this fixed. All right. All right. So that's what the evening will look like for us. And if you still want to be able to leave me a message or a comment, let's see what we can do. There is on the Google Plus page where the event page is for this event, you can just scroll down and leave a message there, and I'll check that right underneath where it says say something. All right, very good. All right, so we're talking about formal portraits, environmental portraits, and I'll tell you what all of these mean. Formal portrait is when someone sits and poses for you, looks into the camera, and there's a fairly neutral background. I'll show you an example of that. And then an environmental portrait is when you see them sort of in the element. And they usually see this for business and professionals, or if you're doing editorial images for a newspaper about someone and you want to sort of show them in their workplace or in their environment. And from the image, you're supposed to be able to glean just a bit about who they are. And then street portraits, of course, is when you find people you don't know walking around, and you stop and introduce yourself and ask for the portrait, where they look into the camera and then you pose them as well. And then event photography is another one where you're at an event, you're the photographer of record, or maybe even just happen to be there with your camera, and you try to grab some images that sort of tell part of the story. One second. Now, one of the reasons I sort of got into this and I enjoy it so much is because my background is that I studied photojournalism, both when I was in college and in the Army. And so, give me 1 second. Let's see if I can get some of this background noise out of the way. All right, sorry about that. So I learned to tell stories and take pictures of people as part of my profession. But I found when I started taking pictures and I experimented with a number of different genres, I really enjoyed the people aspect of it. And so when I found this 100 Strangers project, it really sort of I really connected with it. And 100 Strangers is a project where you're basically doing street portraits. You're going out, finding someone you don't know, stopping, introducing yourself, finding out a little bit about them, and then asking for a photograph. And then they pose for you. And one of the things I think is really great about this, the 100 Strangers project, is because it really helps us. I'm naturally a shy person, believe it or not. I'm an introvert. And so it helps me come out of my shell and sort of work on the techniques of sort of dealing with people, putting them at ease, and then getting great shots of them. And so if you go to it used to be on its own website, but now it's primarily based from Flickr. And if you go to the flickr.com group for 100 Strangers, you'll see that people all around the world are doing this, just from people who look like experienced pros to people who are beginners. But the thing about it is you learn not just photography, but the social aspect, which is going to be very important, as you'll see, when you start learning how to photograph people. And here's an easy way to get started. This is one of the things I do if I'm in 100 Strangers mode, is if I'm walking around with my camera and someone says something to me first, like, hey, are you a photographer? Or, hey, what kind of camera is that? That gives me license then to start working on them to ask for photographs. So this is what she did. I was, wandering through Adams Morgan, minding my own business, and she yelled out, hey, it looks like you're a photographer. So at that point I go over and go, you're absolutely right. And guess what? Now I'd like to take your picture. And she starts laughing as she was waiting for a date, she says. And so it gave us a chance to start a brief conversation. And then, I asked for the photograph. And of course, you saw she posed there. Same thing happened here. This is in Washington, D.C., where there is a new Chuck Brown park. Now, many of you Washingtonians know that Chuck Brown is considered the godfather of go-go and put that kind of music in Washington, D.C. on the map. And so about a month or so ago, they erected a park in Northeast Washington, D.C. in his honor. So I figured I'd go down there and see what it looked like. Now I'm standing there just looking at it. It was raining. And this gentleman says to me, I like the way that this microphone is sort of extended, because that's really what Chuck Brown was about. It was about, the call and response, and he involved the audience. So I thought, okay, interesting viewpoint. I can see that. So you'll see on the left, you'll see the Chuck Brown mural behind him. Turns out he's the historian for Ben's Chili Bowl. Bernie is his name. And he says, he's been studying history of DC and everything, so he knew all about this, and I ended up with having a good conversation with him. And so, this is an easy way to do it. If you're just walking around, sooner or later somebody is going to stop you. Sometimes it's even a pandering politician. Okay, Arlington Democrats, this is Alan Howes, and he wants your vote. I ran into him at the summer fair, county fair, and he is running for county board. And I walk by with my camera, and of course he makes eye contact and smiles and approaches me. So, I make him stop and pose. And so sometimes it's that simple. You let them come to you first, and that's the way actually Luis Mendez works. If the guy I introduced you to first, with that camera, it's such a, that camera is such a conversation piece that as I stood there with him, so many people walked up to him and asked about the camera. It just made it easy for him. And he says that's how he makes up to $1,000 a day, taking street portraits and selling them, the prints, back to people. Now, this was the exact opposite. This is Diana. She was reading a book, her Nook. And she was so engrossed in the story she was reading, she was laughing out loud, and she didn't realize she was. And I just thought that was really interesting how she was so engrossed. So when I walked up to her and said hello, it startled her. And she had this look in her face like she just did not want to be bothered. And within a few minutes, I got that smile out of her because, we'll talk about how we do this in a second. You've got to quickly put people at ease and get them to relax, and then get the photograph. And so, after having been interrupted, she talked about, she told me she was reading a romantic comedy, and she was just enjoying it so much. But she actually ended up posing and being one of my strangers. And this guy, I think I wrote about him before. I almost stalked him because when I was in a Starbucks in New York, he came in and he just looked like he was an entrepreneur of some kind. And so when I saw him finally go out for a break, I followed him outside, and again startled him. But what I did was sort of I told him, I've been watching you come in here, and you just look like you're somebody important. And of course, he started laughing and said, "Well, thank you so much." And then turns out Gamerholic is his company, and he has this Bitcoin based company that he is starting up. And so again, another good conversation ensues. And one of the things I like about this is you get to meet so many interesting and different kinds of people when you do a project like this, and you get to learn so much about them. And along the way, you might get some great images like this. I like that one a lot. She's another one who was also around there. She was smoking. She looked like she was having the worst day ever. So I walked up to her and said, "This must be the saddest smoke break I've ever seen in my life." And she started laughing, and we chatted for a bit. It turns out she wasn't a smoke break, just having a really rough day. And the conversation, helped her smile and laugh, even if just for a minute. Now, they don't always say yes. And here's an example, at least not right away. I asked this guy, this police officer, for his photograph 3 times, and he told me no each time. He said, "No, I'm not allowed to," which we all know is not true. But then after the 3rd time, he says, "Fine, the only way I can take this picture is if you're in it with me." And so he waved some guy over and said, "Here, you take the picture." And that's so, wanted to comply with the law. I said, "Fine, I'll go ahead with it." And we took a picture together. And this is the first smile I saw from him from the entire throughout the number of exchanges we had. So let's talk about, what you would do if you're not doing street portraits, if you're doing a formal portrait or you're doing a commissioned portrait. There are a number of things you want to think about. And the first is you want to connect quickly. This is one of the things I talked about. We're going to go through some principles now, and then we're going to see how they look in pictures after we're done with all of these themes and principles. You want to approach person to person before photographer to subject. And what this means is when I don't walk up to someone with the camera pointed at them, asking for the photograph. the camera is at my side as I walk over there, and I start a conversation as if I was meeting a friend. And the easiest way to do this is just to lead with a compliment. And that's one of the easiest ways I've found. Like whatever it was that led you to believe that they would be an interesting subject, you take that and you begin the conversation with it. So for the guy with the hat and glasses, I talked about how he looked like, somebody who would be an entrepreneur. Actually, I made fun of the smoker, but I think it was enough to disarm her. And also the same thing with the Diana, the reader. You disarm them with something that's sort of breaks the ice, begins the conversation, establishes you as a non-threatening, good person. And so, whatever it is I see, I usually start the conversation with that. And if I can work in a legitimate compliment, I work one in right away. And you'll find that we're all vain on some level. So if some stranger walks up to you and says, "I really like your jacket," or "I really love those shoes," or or something about us, or that they found interesting, we all sort of, at some point we go, "Hell, thank you." So, and one of them was as simple as this elderly gentleman who said he didn't want his picture taken. And then he came call me back and said, "Well, why do you want to take my picture?" I said, "Well, you look interesting to me." And something as simple as bland as that, "You look interesting to me," has got me into so many doors. And so you want us to start person to person. Now, one of the things you want to remember is that sometimes just, a lot of people, this will disarm most people, I have found, and most people will give you an audience if you come up with good energy, a big smile, and something good to nice to say about them. But everyone's not going to be that way. And so one of the things you want to remember that is sometimes it's not about you, it's about them. And I think one of the things we run into, and I talk about this in my street photography workshop, is when you ask someone if did you mind, if I take your photo, and they go, "No," or if they have they respond harshly. For many of us, we take it personally, and we take that energy in, and we think to ourselves, "It must be me. I must be creepy." And one of the things you have to realize that when someone doesn't want to photograph, it's not usually about you. It's usually about them. They could be in a bad mood. They could have, woke up on the wrong side of the bed, had a fight with the spouse. They could have, lost a job. You don't know what's going on in their lives. And so the fact that they are not, amenable or hospitable to you doesn't mean that you are somehow in the wrong. So you want to go there and think about that as your approach. We talked about this on another webinar. We talked about street photography, or you're a journalist or a jerk, that one. And one of the things, we said was, when you're going up there, you're not going in the frame of mind that I'm trying to take something from them. You're going with I'm an artist, I'm trying to create something. And that little shift in mindset can also affect the way you approach and the energy you bring to them. And it makes a difference. So once you're shooting, once you've got the okay to yes, you can photograph me, then you have got to move pretty quickly to get them to relax, so that you can get their true personality to shine through. I'll show you some images that will talk about this. And I have found the easiest way to do that is just to be curious and ask them questions about themselves. What are you doing here? Who are you? What do you do? And then listen to the answers and ask follow-ups based on those questions. Because one of the easiest ways to get people to relax is to get them to talk about themselves. We all love talking about ourselves. So if you can get someone into that space where they talk about themselves, and not just about themselves, but about things they're passionate about or interested in, you find that will help drop the rest of the guard they have up, and then you start to see their real personality start to shine through. It's almost amazing how well that works, because if you say, "Hey, what do you do?" Or let's say you saw me walking down the street, with a New Orleans Saints hat, and you gather and you stopped and said, "Who dat?" And then you start up a conversation and you start asking me about it. You might see that my expression might change because I'm a fan of that team. Or you might ask someone, "Oh, I see you're wearing a Michigan University shirt. Did you go there? Tell me about it." And then they go into if they assuming they had a good experience, they go into this place now where they can now relax and talk with you. Couples is so really easy. You ask them how they met. And it always takes them back to a romantic place. So no matter where they are in their relationship or what happened that morning, if you get them to relive how they met and how did he propose and something beautiful like that, you can usually get them to start looking at each other with that glow in their eyes again. So the other thing is try and make them laugh. I have found that, once you get someone laughing, it's probably like the last threshold to get them to relax and show their real person in front of the camera. And the other thing is, the camera looks both ways. And the reason this is important is you want to approach them with the energy that you want to capture. Meaning, if you go walking over there saying, I think they're going to think I'm creepy, 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 chances are they're going to sense something is amiss in you, and they're probably going to respond in kind. And so if you open up and exude the same kind of energy, big smile, lots of energy, you're happy, because that's what they will reflect to you. And I learned this. It's funny because even in the middle of a shoot, this works against you. And I remember early on when I was shooting portraits, I found myself, because we're so, we're worried about the light and the technical aspects of the camera. And so, the person who I was photographing, the model, I'd take an image of her and I look at the back of the camera and see what I did. And if I didn't like, where the light looked in that particular image or something, I'd frown and I'd sort of think about how I could fix it. And she saw that frown and thought I was frowning at her. So she says, well, what's wrong with the picture? Am I doing that bad? And then she started, getting uptight. And I realized, no, it's not you at all. You're great. It's just me fussing about the camera. And so now we have to learn to look at the camera, if we do look at it in front of our subjects, and not reflect anything other than that's awesome, that's great, and keep the smiles up and continue to fix whatever you need to fix for the next shot. But you can't show that on your face because they pick up on that and they internalize it and then they reflect it back to you. So the camera looks both ways. So you want to make sure that you're always showing and sharing the same kind of energy that you want to capture. Because I know some people will always ask about gear. Typically, when we're photographing people, the portrait length is what we're looking for. So an 85 millimeter on a full frame is about what you look for. I'm sorry. Yeah, 85 millimeter and higher is what we call the portrait range. And we do this because when you're at that focal length, a number of things will happen. One, it makes it easier to get a blurry background and separate your subject from the background, which really makes the portrait look more professional. And then the other thing that we get with that is it flattens. So for facial features, you will find that they're not accentuated as they would be if you use a wide angle lens, and it stretches whatever is in the frame. And so if you're using a full frame, at 85 to 200 is a good range of lens to think about. And if you're using a regular, what we call APS-C, which means this is most of your consumer level digital cameras. If you have a Canon T3i, T5i, 60D, 70D, these are all Nikon, 5300, 5100, 3200, all of these lens cameras that you would normally see. These are what they call APS-C size camera sensors. And so for those, you can actually, because it actually makes the lens, there's like a 1.5 equivalent, they call it. You can actually go as low as a 50 millimeter with any of those and get the same effect as you would as an 85 on a full frame, which would be something like the Canon 6D, 5D, or Nikon 610, 810, and the new 750. All right, so these are some lenses you might choose. Now, when you're shooting, you always want to watch the eyes, because the eyes will tell you everything you need to know. They'll tell you when your subject is giving you a fake smile versus when they're really giving you the genuine smile. You'll be able to see the difference. And here, the other thing is, don't force the smile. If when they smile, the eyes show that they're uncomfortable. You want to photograph who they really are. And some people just don't photograph well smiling, or don't like to be photographed smiling. And that's fine. But the eyes will show you when they truly are genuine. You'll see it sort of a squinty, and you'll see a lot of little crow's feet in the corner of the eyes. I'll show you some of the examples of that. And then when you're looking at the eyes, again, the eyes have it because this is the key to all portraits. You want to make sure you're looking there for the emotion. You're making sure that they're sharply in focus. Anything else can be out of focus on that image except for the eyes. And so this is what you always want to see really pin sharp. And if you play around in Photoshop, a lot of photographers will go back and brighten the eyes as well. If you're using extent lights, you'll see this thing called a catch light in the eyes, and I'll show you what that looks like. But it shows you if you use a flash or some other kind of external lighting, you'll see it reflected in the eyes. And then you can either have eye contact, which means that they are, for most portraits, they're looking right at you, and at that point they become the subject, no matter what else is going on in the image once someone makes eye contact. Or you can have them looking away, and that will tell a very different story. You want to pay attention to your light source. So wherever you are, you want to know where the main light is, so that, if that light on your subject is not the hard light you get from, for instance, a 12 o'clock sun. And you might use a reflector to fill in shadows if you have too many shadows, or just move them into the shade. And then, of course, the background makes or breaks. So you want to make sure there's nothing else in the background that's distracting. And that means anything that doesn't enhance the story or lead your eye to your subject. Any other eyes looking into the frame. This is what photobombing is, and that's why it works, because anyone else who looks into the frame becomes the subject as well, and they become a distraction. And then you want to pay attention to any words in the frame, because we always look at words, we read them, and we try to make a conscious connection to the foreground. Meaning, if you saw me standing on a sign behind me that says, "This guy's an idiot," it doesn't matter that I just walked up and stood there. You would read those words, look at me, and go, "Why is he saying that about himself?" Because we try to make the connection with words. So you always want to make sure that you read all the words in your frame. And if they're not a part of the story, for instance, like the guy I shot outside the Starbucks, then they become a distraction from it. And then gentle posing. We're not going to do a lot of posing or a lot of lighting, because this is really about photographing people this evening. But you still have to, pay attention to these things. When someone is doing something or they're active, you want to make sure you see both hands. And if they are the star of the photograph, or they are the person you're taking a portrait of, you will want to see both eyes. And then for posing, you pay attention to things like lines and negative space, and we'll talk about that. We want to recreate a sense of depth because we have a 2D image. And so we'll turn them at a 45-degree angle away from us and let them look back toward us. And then we want to think about ways of masculine or feminine ways of posing. And then finally, you want to think about what's the story, because the real strong portraits will at a glance will also tell a story. And to do that, you want to decide who is the hero, like who's the one person you want to stand out in this image. And it's usually either one person or two people interacting. And then you get them at the height of the action and at the height of the emotion. And you can tell the story not just in multiple frames, but one frame, 2, 3, even up to 5. If you're taking pictures of family, you want to have them touching, because family connections are both physical as well as emotional. And so nothing will say this family is together and they love each other than to have them throw their arms around each other. All right, enough talking. Let's look at some pictures. Yay! Now, when I talked about, and these are in sort of a random order, but we'll weave them all together with the things we talked about. This is an environmental portrait. I was at the Artomatic show, an event back in July, and one of the things they had was these people who artists or sketch artists. And what they would do is, as people would walk by, they would say, "What did you think about this?" And based on what you said, they would they would put it in a speech bubble and draw a picture. If you look to the left of her, I don't know if you could see yeah, there we go. This is, she drew one for me, because I talked about the amazing creativity, and I had my camera, so you'd see that she drew it, Lynn, DC, and she had a profile of a guy with a camera, and for my little thing, and they were doing this, and I thought this was interesting. And they do this actually for as part of a business. They go out to offsite events for corporate or for companies. So if you're out actually doing an offsite and you're brainstorming, they will sort of document all the brainstorming with art and words. And they said they found that people who do this, who use these services, find that there's a much better retention, and then they have something interesting as a leave behind for people. They take pictures of it and then they take it back home and they remember what they talked about. So here they are doing that together. So that's environmental portraits. So one of the things you want to do is when someone's facing the camera and they're looking into the camera, you want to make sure that you get close enough to really see who they are. And so this might be an example of that. Let's say this lady in the burgundy dress was looking into the camera. At this point, I would be too far away to get a good photograph, because once someone makes eye contact, everyone who looks at the image wants an introduction. And if they couldn't see who she is, the next thing we go is, well, who is that? And so you'll find, well, she's having a conversation with someone else. And so there's a different story going on. So this makes it easier. This is also as they were setting up at the Artomatic show, which happens to be at the National Airport. And I wanted to get an image that showed that it was at the airport. So you got people walking by, but I let them be blurry so that they wouldn't, they're just there for context to show we're in the airport and so that we can see the art. Now, here is a one of, if you're on the side of someone who's looking down, remember we said we want to get both eyes. And so, I had to climb around the other side of the table to get her eyes. Now she was, I got this, and she's giving this sort of the sheepish smile because she was one of the photographers who was supposed to be working that evening, but she ditched the camera to go get food. And so I had to, of course, give her a hard time for that. And this is her looking sheepishly about it. Now, what's good here is that I can see both eyes and both hands, even when she's doing something. Often when people are sort of working with something on a table, they have to look down. If we come around and we don't wait for them to look up, we'll find we get the top of their head and we won't see both of their eyes. And then you have to wait till the other hand comes up, the right hand comes up, so I can see both hands, so I can see what she's doing. Because these are the questions your viewer will be subconsciously asking. Who is she? What is she doing? 2 eyes and 2 hands will tell you both and will help you answer both of those questions. Now, remember I said remember the background? This is what I don't like about this one. We have a very busy background, at least 3 or 4 people over her shoulder. And so typically I wouldn't want to use something like this because it's still cluttered a bit. You have, unless they were just a little more out of focus, the woman in the background, and then the other guy whose head is sort of half eclipsed, and another person half eclipsed behind her back. There's just a lot of stuff there that's busy. And I would think to myself, that's just that could potentially be distracting unless I want to say that it's a sort of a crowded place. So here's one where remember we talked about you want to quickly connect and disarm people. And this is an example of this shot. He was really sort of tugging and asking for something. And I could tell she was starting to get worn down a little bit. And I think I forgot what I said to her. Something like, he's not going to quit until you listen to him, Mom. And of course, then at that point, she just cracked up laughing, like, because, we sort of caught her in that moment when she was like, oh, not another. And he was not going to be ignored. But you got this really great expression as she sort of, gave the full laugh. And of course, the background, of course, there are things going on, but they're just so blurry that you can't really tell. So it's not much of a distraction. These 2 ladies sat down next to me, and I really annoyed at this image because they happen to be really, really fun and interesting people. I was with my son at a place where he was taking a camp this summer, and they just happened to sit down next to me and start up a conversation. And it turns out they were both from one of the cities where I grew up, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and knew a lot of people I knew. And it was just so random for them just to show up and do that. I said, hey, let me take your picture. And of course, in my rush, I tried to blur the background, but not enough to keep that tree from coming out of her head. These are the distractions we talk about, or that bright orange from behind her. So this is why I say, not paying attention to the background can really ruin what could be, because they have such great expressions, but having a tree come out of your head or a bright orange is always going to be a distraction. Some of you who went to this meetup with us down at in DC, where they did the drums, will remember this. She was one of the dancers, and I liked this one because remember we said we try and catch people at the height of the action and at the height of the emotion. And I think what works here is you get the action as her hair tosses up, and then you can see the emotion on her face. Now, if I were going to be super critical, I'd say I still can't see the right eye. But I think in something like this, because she's not looking to the frame, it's okay. But there is a gentleman behind her who's looking directly into the frame. And, luckily he is out of focus, but he is making eye contact with us. So in an ideal situation, I would not want him looking at me like that because he's potentially distracting. We're looking at the eyes we see looking at us first. And if he was sharper in focus, they would have just blown this all together. Here's just a regular portrait. Remember, we talked about having them looking into the frame at a 45-degree angle is usually the standard way, just a little bit above eye level. And if you look, you'll see in the eyes, you'll see those two little white specks there. This is what we talked about, what I meant when I talked about looking for catch lights. Yeah, there were two lights in front of him. I had two strobes in front of him. And so you'll see those reflected. And you can always tell how many lights someone used just by looking into the eyes. And if you didn't see that, lots of times people actually go back after the fact and add the catch light because they think it adds so much personality or interest to a photograph. Here's another one. This is Giovanna. I did this for a project we were working on for one photo week. And, so this was just sort of more of a different kind of lighting. I just had one light on shooting coming from the left side because I just wanted to have the heavy shadows. So again, she's looking into the frame and you can see the catch lights there. I broke a number of rules with this one, but I like to say that they're not commandments, so you're free to break them. So this was also at Artomatic, and she was rushing around, just furrowed brow the entire time, and I joked with her about every time I saw her, she was clutching that duct tape, and it was like she just couldn't be without it. And so this is what made her just sort of give me a more of a natural smile. And then sometimes we just want to catch people when they're not looking. And this is a homeless guy in New Orleans. And I saw him just hugging the dog, which is, again, the height of the emotion. We're always looking for action and emotion. Action here. This is a client of mine who's a dancer. And of course, we want to catch them at the height of the action as well as the emotion. An easy one to get started with is street musicians. Remember to tip them, of course, because they're working. But it's easy now to, when you see someone who's actually performing, if you're having trouble trying to find subjects to get you going, it's easy. For a couple bucks, you could, they will not just pose, but they will ham it up for you. Again, these are all in New Orleans when I did the weekend workshop in New Orleans last spring. Of course, we're going to do that again this year. But there's always someone performing there, Big Easy Jazz Band. And this is the easiest way to get practice photographing people, is to find someone who is a performer. This is a guy from not the Harlem Globetrotters. I think they call them the Harlem Wizards. There's another version like that, and they do these. He was at the Arlington County fair, and of course they were performing for the kids there. So I asked if I could get his picture, and naturally he wanted to do a little hamming up for me. So this is what they do. So these are just some of the images we get as just walking around. But I wanted to just to stop and have someone just go through and help me illustrate some of the good, the bad, and the good and the bad that you might encounter when you're photographing someone. And so I got someone to stop and pose with me to do a number of shots. This is Mary. And this is, I've not shot with Mary before. So this is the first smile she gave me. Remember I said you want to pay attention to the eyes to make sure that the eyes are showing like a true smile. And you can tell when you look at the eyes, run the corners here. When someone's really smiling, you'll see a crease around here because they're really getting into it. And sometimes you'll see, a fake smile will look like that. This is her, not sure I know this guy yet. And then by the time she starts to relax, you see that the eyes squint just a little bit. And now we have a full laugh. This is later on in the shoot when she's comfortable. And so you can tell the difference between the two if you can see this close enough, that one was sort of stoic and one was getting real. And this is her now. I've got her really laughing, and you'll see that of course the squinch. You see, I think Peter Hurley talked about it's all about the squinch when the eyes are sort of closing down and in half shut with the smile, and this is where you know that she's really showing the smile. But remember, I said, sometimes you always don't want to have a smile. She actually preferred to have serious expressions when we shot. So we did a lot just like this because, I wanted to be authentic. And if smiling isn't authentic for her, then we don't force it. You try and honor who they are. The other thing I want to show you in this image is that one of the things you want to do is again, you don't want to have them standing directly in front of you flat. And then you don't want to have their arms flat like this either, because not only do you not have dimension, but you don't have the lines in space and the negative space that you get from an arm sort of propped up is something you'll miss for like this. So something like this, where she puts her hands on our hips, create some negative space there, and then for a female, it starts to show her shape a little more, and it leads to a lot more flattering picture than having both arms flat on her side. So when you're posing people, especially females, you don't want them to just have hands flat on the side like that. The other thing that is typically a no-no, or it can be if you want to say something, is the shot where you're down looking up. And typically you don't shoot that way with females because it's, most women will stop you if you try to do that anyway. But what you typically see, this is sort of like a powerful sort of a captain of industry pose is what I like to call it. But if someone wants to look a little more feminine, then you wouldn't shoot from that angle. And typically you want to be like at eye level anyway. Anyway, so all the other images, we have her looking directly into the frame, and then she's making contact with her. But when you have them looking away from the frame, it could add a bit of intrigue and mystery. Like, what is she looking at? What is she thinking about? What's on her mind? And so that adds a bit of mystery if you want to have them look away from the frame. One of the things people do, you want to also pay attention to the hands. So, a shot like this where her hand is sort of showing knuckles toward you is something you typically don't want to see because it's considered to be in a very aggressive pose. And so when some people might just do that, make that gesture without thinking about it. She just sort of did that and she was relaxing. But, one of the things you're doing when you're photographing is asking them just to relax the hands a bit. Here is something, I try not to do, is have someone who I'm photographing up against something, like leaning against, if you're shooting from straight on. Now, you'll see it when people are shooting from the side like a brick wall, and that's a little different because that creates some sense of motion or depth. But straight on, leaning against something sort of flattens the image quite a bit. And so I tend to have them with stuff, but more space behind them so that the eye can sort of move away and sort of see some depth behind them and not feel like they're, it's just flat. Like I wouldn't shoot it flat against the wall from directly on. So the other thing is we want to pay attention to the hands. So she leans against the tree and says, "Hey, take this picture." And I look and I see one hand and I don't really see the other one. And again, you always want to see both, because it just, at least for a little more pleasant image. And so we bring the hand out for just a bit more so you can see both of her hands. Remember, you want to see both eyes and both hands in most images. The other thing is, remember we talked about paying attention to where your light source happens to be. And so, it's very easy when you're outside to not pay attention and you see how her face is covered in half shadow, half sun. And if the sun, and it's a little cloudy that day, but if it's any brighter, it becomes even more distracting. Like for instance here, now a lot of the clouds have gone away, so you see that you've got these harsh shadows on her face. And when that happens, you typically want to just, the easiest way to do that, to deal with that, is to get them out of the sun and move them over to a place where there's more even shade. Now, if you really want to get fancy and play around with this, the other thing you can do is, where is this? Get a reflector. And then a reflector, of course, if you position it correctly, will reflect the sun that's behind her back into her face and fill in the shadows. The other thing you can do is use a flash and take the intensity down and use it as what we call a fill flash. So in the same place where we saw all those shadows, now we see much more even light on her face. Again, when someone's doing something, you want to see both eyes and both hands. And we're a bit far away, so this is not, the best. We see her interacting. She's looking down at her dog Cubby, and trying to get him to do tricks. So this is almost like a part of a storytelling, but I'd want to, if I shot this, follow up with one that's going to be at least waist high, head and shoulders, or at least, some extreme close-ups of her hand gripping the leash or something like that. And a few more before we, wrap this up. So again, even with pets and people, you want to be at eye level. So because they were low, I had to take a knee. And then the other thing is, I want the Cubby, the dog, to be the star of the film. So I have her looking away. Remember, once she makes eye contact, she becomes the subject. So she looks away, and now it's a picture of the dog. But the minute she looks at us, it's no longer a picture of the dog. It's a picture of her because she's making eye contact. And of course, we have the dog sort of looking away and playing around. All right, so we have we went through a number, and I'm guessing this group chat is not working because I don't see any questions or anything here. If any of you have questions for me, let's see. I don't see any on the Google Plus page either. Okay, so if you do, here's what I'm going to do. We'll set up, I'll set up a page and a link. And for those of you who have questions for after the fact, just leave them there this evening, and tomorrow I'll send it out, this evening, and then I'll just keep answering questions. As a matter of fact, here's what and then I'll send you guys out a link, and you just ask your questions there, and I'll keep answering them as long as you keep bringing them, because I want to make sure that I give you a chance to ask questions or provide any feedback that you want to provide for this. Okay? All right, very good. Now, next week we'll figure out what's going on there. I just want to let you know before we go that this weekend, of course, I am teaching the 10 Steps to Great Pictures, which is the workshop where we talk about everything from how to get great light, how to do metering and fix the camera when the camera gets it wrong, how to tell stories, and then how to get good composition. A lot of the things we talked about today, except I will be there to help you as you practice and work your way through it. And I had a 40% discount that I offered early in the week. I'll just reopen it for the members of this webinar, and you'll be able to use the SE40 again for another day. Now, so those of you, once you're here, just remember to, if you want to join me online on Facebook, we have a Facebook group for the Shuttlebug excursions, facebook.com/groups/Shuttlebug excursions. And then my Facebook page is /PhotoTourDC. And of course, there is my Pinterest page. And then if you do projects.photocoachpro.com, you'll go to the Google Plus community. And of course, you can also find me on Twitter. And if those of you who are in the Washington, D.C. area, of course, you can join us in person, again, with Photo Tour DC and learning person, or come out on an excursion on our meetup group, Shuttlebug Excursions. This is how you reach me. Just email me at lynn@phototourdc.com with any other questions, and I'll be happy to respond to you. All right. Thank you so much for joining us for another one of our free photo webinars. We do this on the second Tuesday of every month. So we'll see you again in November on the second Tuesday. and we'll announce the topic about a week or so before that. Thank you so much for joining Google Hangout. Look forward to talking with you later in the month as I see you on meetups and in our photo tours. Bye.